Proclamation of 1763 didn't really work. They weren't saving money by sending British troops home, so they needed to make up that war debt, and they still had to pay soldiers. So Britain started imposing new taxes. This is just a small list of some of them: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, Quartering Act, and all these things basically taxed colonists on everything that Britain could think possible. For example, the Stamp Act was not like, oh, a tax to mail a letter. It was a tax to buy the paper. If you wanted a sheet of paper, you needed to spend more money. Anything they could think of that you might be using, they were going to charge you extra money. And somebody has to enforce those taxes, because if the soldiers leave, then nobody's going to be there to make sure that the colonists are paying that extra money. So it kind of created this vicious cycle anyway. They have to stay to enforce the laws, but they're enforcing the laws because they have to get paid. And this upsets the colonists. One, because they're spending more money. But ultimately, it was because colonists weren't even allowed to be a part of the British Parliament. The British Parliament was the government system. It was the guys that were making these laws. They were the people that had a say in everything that happened in Britain and the colonies. And if you were a colonist, you forfeited that right to be a part of the British Parliament. And so basically, the colonists were saying, we shouldn't have to pay for things that help Britain if we don't even have a say in what happens to Britain. They were almost like not considered citizens. So they were saying, their basic motto became, no taxation without representation. If we don't have a voice in what happens in this country, then we shouldn't have to pay for the things that you're doing. So this kind of continues to rise. There's all these tensions, and it ultimately leads to this thing called the Boston Massacre one day. And this is when a single colonist was hanging out on the streets one day. He was just an average guy. He actually was like an assistant in a wig shop. And he starts getting into an argument with a British soldier. It was just an argument at first. But you know how things go. It's kind of human nature. If two friends or two people are getting in an argument, all of a sudden everybody's got to be in their business and get involved. And that's kind of what happens here. So these two guys start arguing, and before you know it, there's a crowd of over 200 colonists, and they have surrounded 7 British troops. And the Americans just started taunting the British. They were throwing things at them: tomatoes, rocks, whatever they could find, and they were calling them names, just doing whatever they could to make the British fight back. And finally, one soldier loses his cool and fires his gun. And when that happens, all the British get involved, and it becomes like a mini war right there in the street. When the dust settles, there are 5 men that are dead. There actually were just a couple of men dead at the scene, 3 that were dead at the scene, but 2 were wounded so bad that they died within 24 hours. So ultimately, 5 men die, but the first one to be declared dead was an African American sailor named Crispus Attucks. And he is often remembered as the first death of the American Revolution because of this day. But what happens with this really turned the tides for the revolution in general, because prior to this time, you had a lot of colonists who were still loyal to Britain. They weren't happy with what was happening, but it was still their country. And now, Paul Revere, many people did this, but Paul Revere is one, made an engraving or like a picture, kind of like a newspaper type thing, that made it look like Britain had started this. This is the picture right here. You can see it in this. And it almost looks like a bunch of colonists just hanging out, and all of a sudden Britain's attacking. And these guys did nothing wrong. Britain, they all have smiles on their face. They're ready to kill. And so this is what he does. He comes up with this propaganda and sends it out to all the colonies, and basically is like, do you see what's happening to us? You guys need to join with us. Well, from this time, you get a group called the Sons of Liberty. This was a secret political organization that protested against British taxes and laws. It's secret because if they openly go against Britain, it's treason, and they could be killed or punished for this in some way. So it's a group of men, it's kind of like a club or a fraternity that do not like British rule. They want something different. They want to make a change, but they can't say who they are. And actually, this is the flag of the Sons of Liberty. So it's kind of the secret organization here. You can see the different colonies, their initials around it, because it's made up of multiple colonies. In fact, by the time the American Revolutionary War started, they had a chapter in all 13 colonies. And their biggest job, they shared propaganda, things like that picture on the last slide, to unite people against British taxes and government. So they started sharing out pamphlets and stories and spreading rumors, whatever they could do to make people not want to be a part of British rule. And they started leading boycotts on tax products. It was kind of like, oh, fine, Britain wants to tax us on our sugar. Well, we don't need sugar. Use this instead. Britain wants to tax us on paper. Don't use their paper. They won't make any money from us. So it was kind of like a group that was going to go against the government and kind of ruin it from the inside out.